The Galactic Council's annual military review was always a dull affair. A parade of polished hulls and predictable power readings, a chance for the established species to flex and for the newcomers to blush over their modest contributions. This year, however, offered a moment of comic relief. Orbiting the review platform was a single, derelict warship. It was a grotesque, asymmetrical beast of a vessel, a patchwork of seemingly incompatible technologies welded together with no regard for aesthetics or standard engineering principles. Its armor was scarred and pitted, its weapon ports irregular and cold. Scans returned chaotic, inefficient energy signatures. To the elegant Valerians, the logical synthetics, and the proud Krell, it was an eyesore, a museum piece of dysfunction. They chuckled. They made polite, derisive remarks about the species that must have built it, some pre-FTL civilization, perhaps, stumbling into the void with more courage than sense. The ship's designation, translated from its blocky, angular script, was unyielding resolve. The council filed it away as a curiosity, a joke. Then, the activation signal was sent, and every scanning array, every power grid, every defensive shield on the review platform simultaneously screamed in overload. From the bridge of the rusted monstrosity, a single, calm transmission pinged across all channels in perfect Council Galactic Standard: "Humanity extends its greetings. You were scanning our ship. Is there a problem?" Part 1. The laughter on the Council observation deck died a sudden, choking death. The air, previously filled with the low hum of polite conversation and the soft chime of datapads, was now sliced by the piercing shriek of a dozen different alarm systems. Admiral Kthar of the Valerian Star Fleet, his iridescent scales flushing a deep purple of alarm, stared at the main display. The readouts for the derelict, no, the warship, were not just active, they were behaving impossibly. Energy signatures that had moments ago been dormant or chaotic were now coalescing into stable, terrifyingly potent waveforms. The ship's irregular weapon ports glowed with a deep, angry crimson light that diffused standard spectral analysis. Shields, previously undetectable, now rippled around the vessel in a hexagonal pattern that scattered their most penetrating scans like rain off ancient slate. "Report!" Thar's voice was a sharp hiss. "What just happened?" A synthetic analyst, its crystalline form flickering with rapid data processing, answered with uncharacteristic static in its voice. "Unknown energy surge originating from the vessel's core. Origin point does not match any registered council or known non-council technology. The surge appears to be a response. It overloaded our passive scanning beams by feeding a recursive energy loop back along the carrier frequency. It was a targeted countermeasure." "A countermeasure? To a standard identification scan?" Councillor Tvek of the Krell scoffed, though his crest of bony plates was held tight against his skull in unease. "It is a brutish response. An accident, surely. A malfunction in a primitive power core." On the screen, the unyielding resolve began to move. It didn't turn with the graceful, thrusters pivoting elegance of a council ship. It simply rotated on its central axis, a slow, deliberate grind of metal and inertia, bringing its broadside to bear on the review platform. It was not a maneuver, it was a statement. A line of those irregular ports now stared directly at them, humming with subdued power. The transmitted message hung in the silence. "Is there a problem?" The voice was calm, gender-neutral, translated flawlessly, but it carried an undertone that the universal translators struggled with, a flat, almost bored patience that was more unsettling than any threat. "This is Admiral Kthar of the Galactic Council Peacekeeping Fleet. Identify yourselves and your species of origin immediately." Kthar forced authority into his tone. A slight pause. "Identification: Terran Solar Navy, vessel unyielding resolve, hull classification CA-781. Species: humanity. You initiated a Class 3 intrusive scan on a sovereign warship. Protocol requires a request for permission. You did not make one. Please clarify your intent." The council members exchanged stunned looks. Humanity? The name was in no database, on no registry. Pre-FTL civilizations were monitored, none had achieved this. A lost colony? An anomaly? Your vessel does not conform to Galactic Council safety or design standards, the synthetic representative stated, its logic circuit seeking familiar ground. Its presence in a secured review zone is irregular. Your technology signatures are incoherent. Another pause, longer this time. When the voice returned, it had changed subtly. The flat patience was now edged with something else. Incoherent. Interesting. Your scans analyzed for efficiency, symmetry, and energy purity. Ours are optimized for different parameters: survivability, redundancy, and effect. You see a patchwork. We see a ship that has survived 3 reactor breaches, 2 hull shears, and a close-range antimatter detonation. It is not pretty. It is unyielding. As for your standards, we were not aware our ship needed to meet the aesthetic standards of a committee to be considered functional. A low murmur ran through the observation deck. The synthetics crystals dimmed slightly in confusion. Logic could not process pride and dysfunction. Where is your homeworld? Thar demanded, trying to regain control. Why are you not in our records? Our records are separate. We have been occupied. The unyielding resolve was on a long-range patrol when we detected your energy signatures. We came to investigate. This is now an investigation of an unprovoked scan on a military asset. Your turn, clarify intent. The audacity was breathtaking. A single, ragged ship was not only refusing to answer questions but was interrogating them. Thar was about to order a show of force, a gentle powering of the platform's defensive turrets, when a new alert flashed. It was from deep-range sensors, ones pointed away from the core worlds, out into the unmapped spiral arm. Multiple contacts. Dozens. Hundreds. Emerging from what was supposed to be an empty, navigational hazard known as the Grey Drift, a dense nebula littered with microasteroids and violent ionic storms, deemed utterly impassable for fleet travel. The contacts flickered onto the tactical holodisplay, each tagged with the same chaotic, inefficient energy signature as the unyielding resolve, but magnified 1,000-fold. There were carriers shaped like jagged mountains, destroyers that resembled bundles of crude girders, and dreadnoughts that looked less built and more forged in some stellar inferno. The voice from the unyielding resolve crackled again, and, for the first time, a hint of something like grim satisfaction colored its tone. Ah! The fleet has arrived. They were wondering why we stopped broadcasting. It seems your scan triggered our automatic BattleNet isolation protocols. They thought we might be in trouble. On the display, a new signal broadcast from the largest, most brutal-looking dreadnought. It was a simpler message, broadcast in the clear on all frequencies. It was a video feed. It showed a being, a human. It was bipedal, symmetrical, oddly fragile-looking compared to the robust Krell or the elegant Valerians. It wore a simple, functional uniform, adorned not with medals of honor, but with small, practical tools. Its face was stern, its eyes holding a depth of experience that seemed to bore through the screen. It spoke, and its voice was translated, but the words were direct, bypassing the Council's diplomatic protocols entirely. This is Admiral James Crow of the Terran First Fleet. We are here. We have been fighting a war for survival in the dark for 2 centuries, against an enemy you have not yet met. We are tired. We are damaged. But we are not weak. You scanned one of our wounded veterans and called it a joke. Now explain yourselves to the rest of us. The observation deck was utterly silent. The joke was over. The lesson was beginning. Part 2. The silence on the observation deck was so profound it had weight. The tactical holodisplay, now crowded with hundreds of terrifyingly inelegant human ships, cast a sickly, pulsating light over the faces of the Council members. Admiral Kvar's scales had settled into a dull, ashen gray. The synthetic analyst's core flickered erratically, its logic circuits overwhelmed by the impossible fleet emerging from the impassable nebula. The humans hadn't just arrived, they had emerged from a place the Council considered a natural wall, a cosmic keep-out sign. The video feed from the human dreadnought, which the ship's own blocky text identified as Terra's hammer, held steady. Admiral James Crow's face was a landscape of grim patience. He did not repeat his demand. He simply waited, his eyes a silent, unnerving pressure. It was Counselor Elia, a Rylan diplomat whose species prized calm negotiation above all, who found her voice first. Admiral Crow, on behalf of the Galactic Council, we offer our profound apologies. The scan was a standard procedure for our annual review. No offense was intended. We had no knowledge of your species or your military presence. On the screen, Crow's head tilted slightly. A standard procedure. You scan unknown vessels without hail or warning in what you consider your secure space. Your security protocols are lacking. And your ignorance is not an excuse, it is a liability. He leaned forward, and the image zoomed slightly, emphasizing the weariness etched around his eyes. 234 years ago, a Terran exploration vessel, the Nightingale, made first contact. Not with you. With what we call the Devourers. A xenocidal swarm species that operates on a logic of pure consumption. They do not negotiate. They do not communicate. They strip worlds, convert biomass and technology into more of themselves, and move on. The Nightingale's last transmission was a warning, followed by the sound of their hull being peeled open. We have been at war ever since. A war for literal survival, fought in the dark between the stars, with no allies, no respite. He let that sink in. 2 centuries of total war. The concept was alien to the Council, whose conflicts were measured in diplomatic skirmishes and brief, policed engagements. The Grey Drift, Crow continued, gesturing vaguely off-screen, is our buffer. Our front line. It is not naturally impassable. We have made it so. Seeded it with sensor ghosts, minefields that look like asteroid clusters, and ionic dampeners to mask our movements. It is a wall of gristle and pain we built with our ships and are dead to keep the Devourers from spilling into this populated region of space you call home. The unyielding resolve was on the inner patrol, monitoring for any Devourer incursions that might slip through. When it detected your review fleet's massive energy output, it moved to investigate a potential new front. And you laughed at it. The shame on the observation deck was now palpable. The joke had been a veteran standing guard at the gate of hell, and they had mocked its scars. We require, Crow stated, the word leaving no room for debate, an immediate council. Not a review. A strategic briefing. You will provide complete astrometric charts, historical data on any unknown spatial anomalies or disappearances in the outer regions, and full disclosure of your military capabilities. Not to assess you as a threat. To assess if you can hold a line when not if the Devourers break through ours. Admiral Kthar finally found his defiance. You cannot simply demand our total strategic disclosure. There are protocols. Sovereignty. The image on the screen shifted. It was no longer Crow's face. It was a data stream, a playback from the unyielding resolve sensors during the Council's scan. It showed, in horrifying detail, the scan's parameters. But the human overlay highlighted something else. Along the carrier wave of the scan, like a scent carried on a breeze, was a faint, unique energy residue. A residue the unyielding resolves databases tagged with a 99.8% match. During your standard scan, Crow's voice narrated over the playback, your platform emitted a specific harmonic frequency from its main power coupling. It's a byproduct of your type of quantum manifold. Our records show that same harmonic residue was present in the debris field of the Nightingale. Traces of it have been found on Devourer hive ships. The image cut back to Crow, his expression stone. Your technology, Admiral Kthar, shares a common ancestor with the weapons of the enemy that has been eating its way toward you for 2 centuries. Did you give it to them? Or did you lose it? The floor seemed to drop out from under the observation deck. The implications were universe-shattering. The human war, their immense sacrifice, was somehow linked to the Council's own technological past. The arrogant, polished civilization at the galaxy's core was suddenly, irrevocably, tied to the ragged, bleeding defenders at its rim. You will provide the data, Crow repeated, his voice final. And you will prepare. Our fleet will hold its position. Send your senior military and political leadership to the Terrace Hammer in one standard day. Come in a single, unarmed shuttle. We will educate you. The transmission ended. The human fleet hung in the void, silent and menacing, a ragged wall of iron and resolve. The unyielding resolve turned again, its scarred hull blotting out the light of a distant star, no longer a joke, but a solemn, terrifying monument. The council was no longer in charge. They were students, about to receive a lesson written in fire and blood. Part 3. The shuttle, a sleek, pearl-white Valerian craft named Diplomatic Concord, felt like a coffin as it drifted toward the human dreadnought. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with tension, smelling of alien musk and cold anxiety. Admiral Kthar, Counselor Elia, and the synthetic representative designated Sigma-7 sat in rigid silence, accompanied by 2 stone-faced Krell honor guards. The viewport framed the approaching Terra's hammer, and, with every kilometer, its sheer, brutal scale became more oppressive. It wasn't just large, it was dense. Its armor plating was a history of violence, scorch marks from plasma, deep grooves from kinetic impacts, and vast, discolored patches where entire sections had been cut out and replaced with mismatched, thicker alloy. They build like they are expecting to be hit. Constantly, Sigma-7 observed, its crystalline form humming as it processed the visual data. Efficiency is sacrificed for structural redundancy. Illogical, unless the probability of catastrophic damage approaches certainty. They have been at war for centuries against an enemy we apparently helped create, Elia murmured, her delicate fingers intertwined tightly. What have we done? Thar said nothing. The revelation about the harmonic signature had unraveled a thread in his mind, pulling at a half-remembered piece of Valerian history, a classified project, a grand experiment in dimensional energy tapping, that was scrapped after a catastrophic, hushed-up failure over 300 years ago. Data cores were purged. Scientists disappeared. Had something leaked? The shuttle was engulfed in the shadow of the dreadnought. A landing bay door opened, not a clean energy field, but a massive, grinding mechanical iris that looked like it belonged on a bank vault. The bay within was a stark contrast to the gleaming, sterile hangars of the council. It was a cacophony of noise, sparks, and organized chaos. Human crews in stained, functional coveralls swarmed over fighters that looked as beaten as the mothership. The air tasted of ozone, metal, and something organic, sweat and machine oil. Gravity was slightly heavier than standard. As they disembarked, a human reception party awaited. It was not a line of polished officers. It was a single woman, flanked by 2 soldiers in powered, yet equally scarred, armor. The woman was of middle years, her hair cropped short, her face bearing a network of fine lines that spoke of stress and command, not age. A faded patch on her shoulder depicted a bird in flight over a cracked world. I am Commander Althea Vance, she said, her voice carrying the same flat, translated tone they'd heard before, but her eyes were sharp, actively assessing each of them. Admiral Crow is waiting. Follow me. Do not touch anything. Do not stray from the path marked by the yellow line. She turned and walked without ceremony. The tour that followed was a brutal education. They were not taken to a pristine briefing room. They were marched through the bowels of the ship. They saw engineering sections where roaring fusion cores were surrounded by 3 layers of emergency bulkheads, each manually operated. Automated systems fail when the main computer is hit by a bioelectric pulse, Vance stated, noticing Sigma-7's questioning gaze at a bank of crude manual levers. They passed a medical bay that was more a trauma ward. They saw human medics working on a crewman whose arm ended in a mass of glistening, semi-organic gel. Bioacid weapon, Vance explained curtly. The gel is a nanoscaffold. It'll regrow the limb in 6 weeks. Hurts like hell. He's lucky. Usually, it gets in the bloodstream and liquefies you from the inside. They saw walls lined not with decorative art, but with layers of what looked like ceramic ablative tiles, cheap and replaceable. Devourer projectiles are hypervelocity shards. They shred fancy armor. This stuff shatters, absorbs the energy, and we slap on a new plate. We have factories that do nothing but make these tiles. Finally, they entered the bridge. It was dimly lit, illuminated by dozens of physical screens and holos displaying tactical data. It was crowded, not with sleek consoles, but with rugged stations, each manned by a focused human. In the center stood Admiral James Crow. He looked older in person, the weight of his years and his command of physical presence. Sit, he said, gesturing to a cluster of chairs that looked bolted to the deck. He didn't wait for pleasantries. A holo display ignited between them, showing a star map. One region was highlighted in a cancerous red devourer space. A thin, blue line represented the gray drift. Beyond it, the green dots of council worlds shone, innocently close. This is the situation, Crow began. The devourers are a hive intelligence. No central queen. Each ship is a node. Destroy one, and its knowledge is distributed. They adapt. Quickly. They used kinetic weapons. We developed magnetic dispersion fields. They switched to plasma. We developed the ablative tiles. They developed the bioacid. We are on our 4th generation of anti-acid nanites. It is an evolutionary arms race measured in months, not years. He zoomed in on the gray drift. This is our choke point. Their FTL is biological, requires specific gravitational gradients. The drift disrupts that. We fight a holding action here, bleeding for every light year. But their pressure is increasing. Our predictive models, based on your astrometric data which we have now analyzed, indicate they are probing for a new path. A line extended from the red zone, curving around the drift, heading directly toward a cluster of green dots, the core council systems. They will find it. Within 18 standard months, likely sooner. When they do, they will emerge here, in the Relazan corridor. The map highlighted a peaceful, well-traveled trade route. Thar felt cold. Our forces there are peacekeeping garrisons. Light defensive platforms. They will be annihilated in hours, Crow stated, matter of fact. Which brings us to you. Your technology is advanced. And clean. And fragile. He brought up schematics of a Valerian cruiser. Your shield harmonics are optimized for energy dispersion. The Devourers use kinetic and bioacidic munitions that bypass that. Your hulls are single crystal composites for sleekness. They fracture under sustained percussive impact. Your ships are designed to win battles. Ours are designed to not die. You need to learn. Fast. He leaned on the console, his gaze locking onto Thar. And, you need to tell us about Project Icarus. Thar's heart skipped a beat. The ancient, buried name. How do you know that name? The harmonic signature. We reverse-traced its theoretical origin. It points to a specific branch of quantum physics your species abandoned. Our historians cross-referenced that with fragmented data from early devourer wreckage symbols, molecular markers. The trail, however, faint, leads back to a Valerian origin. Project Icarus. What was it? Under the combined weight of the human commander's stare and the terrifying reality on the map, Thar's resolve crumbled. He spoke of the old folly, an attempt to open a micro-wormhole to a theoretical energy-rich dimension. The experiment had not just failed, it had torn a hole. Something had come through. The facility was vaporized from orbit, all records destroyed. It was deemed a tragic accident with an unstable new energy source. They had never considered that the something that came through had survived, had propagated, had evolved in the darkness into the Devourers. The bridge was silent save for the hum of equipment. Commander Vance looked away, her jaw tight. Crow simply nodded, as if a grim suspicion had been confirmed. So, you opened a door. And left it open. We have been fighting what fell through it for 10 generations. He didn't sound angry. He sounded profoundly, wearyingly resigned. Your debt is not an apology. Your debt is your entire industrial and military capacity. You will retrofit your ships with our armor, our point defense systems. You will learn our tactics. You will mobilize every ship, every shipyard. You will help us build a new wall, not of nebulas, but of guns and steel in the Relazan corridor. Or everything you have built, every beautiful, polished world, will become fuel for the swarm you unleashed. The delegation from the Galactic Council sat in the gritty, functional heart of the human warship, their arrogance gone, replaced by the horrifying understanding of the bill that had just come due. The lesson was no longer about respect, it was about survival, and their final exam was war. Part for the revelation hung in the recycled air of the bridge like a toxic gas. The elegant, peaceful core had birthed, through arrogance and negligence, the horror that had been gnawing at the galaxy's edges. Admiral Cthara's confession seemed to shrink him in his chair. Counselor Elia looked physically ill. Only Sigma 7 reacted with a clinical, terrifying logic. The probability that the Devourer threat would have remained contained to the outer darkness indefinitely was negligible. Contact was inevitable. The human intervention is a statistically favorable variable. Admiral Crow ignored the synthetic. His eyes were on Cthar. Regret is a luxury paid for with blood, and we have paid in full. Now you pay with sweat, with fire, with the dismantling of your pride. You have 18 months. Perhaps less. The Relazan corridor becomes the anvil. Your fleet will be the hammer. But, first, it must be remade. What followed was a storm of unprecedented scale that swept from the Terra's hammer to the heart of the Galactic Council. Crow dispatched human engineering teams, not diplomats, but grizzled chiefs and fabrication specialists who spoke in shorthand and cared only for results. They descended upon the pristine shipyards of Valeria Prime, of Krelos, of the synthetic orbital forges. The culture clash was seismic. Human engineers looked at the flowing, artistic lines of a Valerian cruiser and saw structural weak points. That elegant sweep along the dorsal spine? It's a fracture line waiting for a kinetic impact. Weld a girdle of reinforced alloy over it. No, we don't care if it ruins the profile. They saw the exposed, gleaming sensor arrays. A single burst of bioacidic shrapnel will blind you. Box them in with cheap, replaceable shutters. You can peek out between volleys. The Krell, proud of their floating fortress ships, balked at the human prescription. You want us to lower our shield density to allow for a secondary, physical armor layer? That is heresy. A human chief, a woman with a plasma burn tracing her neck, threw a data slate on the table. It showed a simulation, a Krell fortress taking a Devourer kinetic salvo. The beautiful shields flared and held for a glorious moment, then overloaded. The next salvo struck the bare hull, detonating internal magazines. Your heresy is a pretty firework before you die. Ours is ugly, and it lives. Your choice. The synthetics faced a different challenge. Their logic was impeccable, their designs optimal for known threats. The humans introduced a variable they called asymmetric desperation. They showed them battle logs from the Grey Drift. A human destroyer, its engines dead, using its last power to fire its life pods, loaded with scrap metal and unspent fuel, into the path of a Devourer hive ship as a makeshift kinetic barrage. A corvette deliberately overloading its reactor in the midst of a swarm, taking a dozen enemies with it. Your logic seeks efficiency in victory, a scarred human commander told the assembled synthetic minds. Our logic seeks cost in our defeat. Make the enemy pay for every meter, for every second, with more than they can afford. This cannot be programmed. It must be understood. Resistance was fierce. Traditionalists screamed about defilement. Economists warned of ruinous cost. Politicians worried about panic. The turning point came not from a speech, but from a shipment. Crow authorized a single, heavily escorted human transport to visit each core world. It did not carry weapons or diplomats. It carried artifacts. On Valeria Prime, they laid out the carbon-scored and twisted personal effects recovered from dead ships, a melted child's toy from a colony vessel, a fused data core containing the last, frantic log of a mining outpost, a piece of hull plate from the Nightingale with the Devourer's corrosive pitting eating through the old Earth language letters. On Krelos, they played unedited sensor logs from the Grey Drift. The council delegates saw the true face of the Devourer swarm not as tactical icons, but as a living, churning wave of chitin and blades, consuming asteroids, ships, everything, leaving only sterile dust. They heard the human battle chatter, calm and crackling with static, breach on Deck 5, containing. Hammer 2 is gone. They took the big one with them. Don't let them pivot. Hold the line. For the Nightingale. Hold. On the synthetic orbital, they presented a single, parsed data stream, the evolutionary tree of Devourer weaponry, mapped against human countermeasure development. It was a terrifying, accelerating spiral of adaptation. The humans had kept pace, barely, through sheer, bloody-minded ingenuity. The synthetics processed the data and reached a unanimous conclusion: without integration of the humans' illogical survival paradigms, Council civilization's probability of extinction within 50 standard years approached 96.3%. The dam broke. Shipyards began working around the clock, the beautiful sparks of artistry replaced by the brutal, orange glare of mass-scale welding. Foundries that once crafted delicate cultural artworks now poured rivers of standardized, ugly ablative armor plating. The Council fleet was pulled from its peacekeeping duties, forming the skeleton of the new Relazan line. Admiral Kthar, stripped of his pride and his old assumptions, became the Council's liaison. He stood beside Commander Vance on the bridge of a newly retrofitted Valerian flagship, now christened Remembrance. It wore a girdle of human-design armor, its elegant lines broken by boxy missile pods and slab-sided point defense batteries. It was ugly. It was strong. Looking at the tactical display showing the burgeoning fortifications in the Relazan corridor, a mix of human dreadnoughts and reshaped Council vessels, Kthar spoke to Vance. "We are trying to learn. But we do not have your instinct. 2 centuries of war is a culture we cannot replicate in months." Vance watched a squadron of human-piloted fighters, sleek but tough, drilling with Krell interceptors. "You don't need our instinct. You need our hindsight. We are giving you the blueprint of our pain. Build from it. And pray you build well enough." She pointed to the screen, where the unyielding Resolve was now leading a mixed patrol. "That joke is now teaching your best pilots how to spot a Devourer ambush before it happens. Laugh at it now." Kthar did not laugh. He felt a cold, sober respect. The galaxy had fractured into a before and an after. The before was polished, orderly, and ignorant. The after was ugly, desperate, and real. The anvil was being forged. And, in the dark, beyond the gray drift, the hammer of the Devourers was poised to fall. Part 5, 17 months. That was the grace period granted by Admiral Crow's models. In 16 months and 3 weeks, the silent alarm strung across the gray drift's furthest sensor buoy triggered. It wasn't a probe. It was the vanguard of a main force, a spearhead of blade-shaped Devourer hiveships carving a new path through a gravimetric saddle the humans had missed. The door to the Relazan corridor was being kicked in. Aboard the Terra's hammer, the response was not panic, but a grim settling, like veterans hearing a familiar, dreaded sound. Klaxons blared, but they were the short, functional bursts of the human action station's alarm. Across the newly formed Allied defense line, the call went out. Council crews, many still unfamiliar with their retrofitted ships, felt a cold dread. The human crews felt something else, a weary resolve. The unyielding Resolve, its scars proudly unrepainted, was at the tip of the spear, leading a mixed squadron of Terran corvettes and Valerian frigates. Its commander, a man named Erickson who had been a junior officer during the Council's review, opened a fleet-wide channel. "All units, this is Resolve. Remember your drills. The first wave is always the cutters fast, light, meant to disrupt and probe. Your new point defense is rated for them. Trust it. Hold formation. Human ships, watch the flanks. Council ships, watch your harmonic emissions, keep them dirty, like we showed you. No heroics. Just hold the line." The Devourer swarm emerged from the spatial rift like oil bleeding into water. They were nightmare geometry, all sharp edges and organic pulsing lights, moving with a terrifying, silent synchronicity. Just as predicted, the cutter ships detached, accelerating toward the line in a blizzard of chitin and metal. What happened next was the first test of the grand, ugly amalgamation. On the Valerian flagship Remembrance, Admiral Kthar gave the order to fire. His new, human-style mass drivers roared, firing slugs of dense tungsten instead of elegant plasma bolts. They struck the lead cutters, not vaporizing them in a clean flash, but blasting them into ragged, spinning fragments. It was brutal. It was effective. But the Devourers adapted. The next wave came in a corkscrew pattern, spitting clouds of hypervelocity bioacid shrapnel. On the Krell Fortress Stone Fist, the captain, remembering the simulations, did the unthinkable. He dropped his forward shields and ordered the new armored shutters closed. The shrapnel peppered the thick, ugly plates, cracking and fusing to them, but not breaching. As the swarm passed, the shutters opened, and the fortress's full broadside, now a mix of its own plasma cannons and human missile batteries, lashed out, tearing a hole in the Devourer formation. It was working. The hybrid tactics, the ugly armor, the illogical redundancies, they were holding. For hours, the battle raged at the mouth of the corridor, a deafening, violent ballet of light and death. Losses were taken. A human cruiser, the Steadfast, sacrificed itself to block a kinetic lance aimed at a synthetic coordination hub. A wing of Krell interceptors, using human-designed dispersion patterns, shattered a Devourer carrier trying to deploy smaller drones. Then, the main hive ship arrived. It was a Leviathan, larger than the Terra's hammer, its surface crawling with weaponized biology. It did not engage the line. It began emitting a powerful, subspace pulse. The effect was immediate. Across the Council vessels, sophisticated systems flickered. Targeting computers lagged. Shield harmonics wavered, trying to autocorrect to a more efficient frequency, the very frequency the Devourers were now priming their primary weapons to exploit. Panic threatened to erupt on the Council ships. Their greatest strength, their optimized, clean technology, was being turned against them. Admiral Crow's voice cut through the chaos, calm and firm on the old, hardwired audio channels the humans used as backup. All Council vessels, execute Protocol Ugly Duckling. Now. Protocol Ugly Duckling was the final, desperate human lesson. It was not a software patch. It was a physical switch. Crews raced to engineering spaces and pulled massive, crude circuit breakers, disengaging their smart systems. They switched to purely optical targeting, to manual shield frequency rotation using printed-out algorithms, to engine control via hardline telegraphs. The Council fleet, for a few critical minutes, stopped being a fleet of advanced starships and became a collection of armed, armored, and very angry bricks. It was inelegant. It was slow. It was glorious. The Devourer pulse, designed to exploit sophisticated logic, found nothing to latch onto. The hive ship hesitated, its adaptation cycle broken by the sudden, irrational reversion to analog brutality. In that window of confusion, the unyielding resolve acted. Not with a grand weapon, but with a veteran's instinct. Erickson saw a flicker in the hive ship's pulsing energy field, a weak point created when it shifted power to emit the pulse. He didn't wait for a firing solution. He pointed his scarred bow at the spot and ordered, all power to the ramming prow. Comms, tell the fleet, Resolve is making a hole. Follow us in. The old warship, the one that had been a joke, accelerated. It didn't look like a hero. It looked like a piece of shrapnel hurled by a giant. It struck the hive ship's weak point not with a clean penetration, but with a catastrophic, grinding impact, its reinforced, asymmetrical hull tearing into the organic metal. It was a suicidal move, born of 2 centuries of knowing some breaches could only be sealed with your own hull. But it wasn't suicide. As the Resolve lodged itself in the wound, its remaining power cells, its ordnance, even its battered reactor, were set to overload by its final crew command. The resulting detonation didn't just destroy the Resolve. It tore the hive ship open from the inside, a chain reaction of fire and shrapnel ripping through its core. With the command node shattered, the Devourer swarm lost cohesion, becoming a milling, confused mass. The Allied fleet, now switching their smart systems back online, fell upon them with renewed fury, hammering the anvil until the last cutter was destroyed. Silence returned to the Relazan corridor, broken only by the crackle of dying fires and the distress signals of crippled ships. The line had held. The price was high. Among the lost was the unyielding Resolve. On the bridge of the Terra's hammer, Admiral Crow looked at the tactical display, now clearing of red icons. He then looked at the feed from the Remembrance. Admiral Kvar's face was on the screen, smudged with soot, his eyes holding a new, hard-won understanding. There was no triumph in them, only the sober acknowledgement of cost. The line held, Admiral Crow, Kvar said, his voice rough. The first line held, Crow corrected gently. There will be more. They will adapt again. So will we. He paused, then offered a faint, tired nod of respect. Your people fought well. The resolve would be satisfied. In the aftermath, the Galactic Council did not build a monument of polished crystal to the victory. They built one of forged iron and scarred armor plating, a replica of the unyielding Resolve's prow, placed in the central concourse of their great assembly. It was ugly. It was asymmetrical. It was real. The inscription, in both Galactic Standard and the Human's Angular script, read, "The joke that guarded the gate." The lesson was complete. Humanity was not superior. They were just older in the ways of darkness. They had taken a civilization that